Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today I am once again building something from The Legend of Zelda. The new video game, Tears of the Kingdom, has been released as of last week, and I have got a little bit of time to get to play it a little bit. And one of the first things that I noticed as I jumped in the game, beyond all the amazing cutscenes and upgrades and things that they've tweaked from Breath of the Wild to make this even better, is the Master Sword looks absolutely destroyed, and I want to build it. I am going to print a screenshot and then use that as my template. So hopefully you'll learn from this a different way to make templates and maybe open up some doors to you as far as guns or weapons that you would like to build, and you can easily build it in chunks. So without further ado, let's build the devastated Master Sword from Tears of the Kingdom. Let's get to building. I started by doing a simple image search of the Master Sword from Tears of the Kingdom and found this shot. I pasted it into an Excel document and then printed the whole workbook. You can do this in a number of different programs. To me, this was the easiest one. It took me about 3 prints to get it sized to my hand. Once I printed it out, I cut the edges, taped them up on the front and the back, and then cut it out. For my blade, I'm going to use some super dense EVA foam called What the Foam from Cosplay Apprentice. This is some 6mm foam that I'll make 2 copies of the blade to make it super rigid. Because the blade is short and the foam is dense, I don't think I'll need a support on the inside, so if you're using a less dense foam, you may have to put a wire in there. I cut out the portion that will make the blade, trace it onto the materials with a Sharpie, then cut it out with a hobby knife. You could print out multiple copies of the sword to break it into smaller pieces to help you, but I'm just going to tape it back up as I go. I'm working from the blade down to the pommel. To cut my bevels in the foam, I trim off those parts of the pattern and trace them onto the foam with a Sharpie. Since there are 2 layers of foam, my center line is already marked. With a sharp blade, I cut in the angle. If you're uncomfortable cutting into the piece like this, cut it short of the line and then sand it to the final shape. I get it really close to where it needs to be, then smooth it out with my rotary tool. Once the bevels are in, I do the same thing for the groove cuts into the damaged areas. On the blade of the Master Sword is the classic Triforce symbol. I'm going to burn mine in by hand. I punched some holes along the lines of the design with a pin to transfer my lines onto the foam. Then I played a quick game of connect the dots. I cranked the wood burner on high, slap on a respirator to protect my lungs, open a window right next to my workstation, and slowly work my way around the symbol. This dense foam burns slowly at first, but picks up quickly once you pierce the surface, so you need to be careful and watch what you're doing. Keep in mind this video is sped up. Now I'm going to work on the blade collar, the part that extends over the base of the blade and houses the gold embellishments. I am just going to cut the inside slit, extend the sides out just a little bit, and then glue them directly to the blade. Using some 4mm foam and sandwiching it over the blade, then I can sand the ends of it and shape it. To position it on the blade, I just tape it back to the corresponding part on my paper pattern and trace where it should lay on both sides of the blade, then contact cement them together. I have actually made a couple of master swords over the years, some of them before I even started doing YouTube, and this is the most complicated shape that you gotta make in the whole project, basically. The little winged handle guard things can be a pain. I actually tried carving it out of a thick block of 36mm foam, but it didn't look right and had a lot of mess ups on it, so I'm gonna approach it in a different manner. I'm using some 10mm HD foam here from SKS stacked into 3 layers for each wing. The middle layer will be solid and the outer details will be cut into smaller pieces. here I am cutting the outer pieces of the guard to cut and sand my bevels. This can get a little bit tedious. I'm just eyeballing the lines and freehanding it, but you could definitely cut the paper parts to get it more precise. Once the details and the center lines are drawn, I cut them into smaller sections, bevel them to the middle with a sanding drum first, then smooth it all over with a stone bit. I then glue the segments back together and glue it to the centerpiece, that is the one full whole piece. In order to get the 3 bevel piece to line up on the 2 bevel piece spike, I cut out the shape of the bottom of it into the spike. Once all that shaping is done, I have to repeat this step 3 more times. That's why I said it's going to get very tedious. Lots of sanding ahead of me. The bottom of the guard is just various cylinders basically, and the pommel is a cylinder, a mushroom cap, and a prism. It kind of helps to break it up into basic shapes and then just piece it together as you go. I have these drafting stencils that I got off of Amazon that make quick work of it. Between it and the template, I can figure out how big I need each of these pieces to start out at before I start sanding them back. For the guard, I used a piece of 48mm foam, 10mm foam for the larger ring in the middle, and 6mm for the small circle on the bottom. Making this up as I go, I have not figured out yet how I'm going to join these things together. My thought here is that I'm going to cut a wedge out of the cylinder stack and glue the blade into place. This would not be sturdy for LARPing swords or any kind of play around, but since this is purely a decorative purpose, it's good enough, I guess. The handle needs a hole burrowed into the guard and the pommel for it to fit together. I push my 3/4 of an inch PVC pipe into the foam to mark how big the hole needs to be, making it just a little smaller so it's a snug fit. Be careful when you are plunging in a rotary tool into foam. With no place for the dust to escape, it starts to melt into where you're drilling into, causing a liquid hot form of nastiness to bubble up. A good practice is to burrow in a little bit and then back out frequently. Make sure to wear a respirator and work in a well-ventilated area while sanding or burning foam. You don't want to breathe this stuff in. When I get it all burned out, I super glue them into place. Now I'm making the little gold gem in the middle of both sides. I follow the same steps as most of the other parts I've shown so far. I cut it off the paper template, trace it onto some 10mm foam, and shape it with a hobby knife, box cutter, and rotary tool. I do want to point out an accident that occurred while building this part. You see me put down the rotary tool in a second. My sanding disc burst off of the bit, impacts my finger, then smacks me in the face. At 33,000 RPMs, when it hits my finger, it feels like it's being smashed by a hammer. I barely bled, it didn't leave a big bruise on my finger, and luckily I had my face shield on, my respirator, which prevented it from hitting an eye. Anytime you're using a power tool, take precaution. Even the simplest of tools can be dangerous. Even if you're using all the proper procedures and cautions, accidents do occur, so just be careful. Now I'm going to wrap the PVC in 2mm foam and weave some thin strips of 2mm foam to make that crisscross grip that's in the green on the final piece. When gluing foam to PVC, I like to use super glue. It gets a better grip. I also like to use it on small parts to speed the process up, like these tiny little strips. Keep in mind that using super glue will make foam a little rigid, so once it gets stuck down, you may have to rip it off before replace an entire piece. Proceed with caution. I covered the handle with foam so the finish was consistent across the entire sword. Two coats of Plasti-Dip, or your foam sealant of choice. To save myself a little bit of time, I'm going to coat the handle with some blue spray paint. To keep the blue off of the blade, I tape off the collar with some blue painter's tape and then cover the rest of the blade with plastic bag to then take outside to spray. For the rest of the paint job, I'm going to hand paint it on with some acrylic paint from Plat Effects. My thought for the paint job is to kind of give it that cell shading look that the game has, trying to be as true to the reference image as possible. So all the parts will get their base coat color, then the edges will be hit with a lighter or darker value of the same color. This will help pick up the details and make the end result look cartoonish and two-dimensional. I also thought about making it a bit more realistic and grunge it up like a typical Much Props fashion, even throwing in some rust on there, but eventually I talked myself out of it and decided to try and stay as true to the game as possible. I realize my colors aren't exact color matches, but it's close enough. And we are finished. Here is the end result. Overall, I think it turned out pretty cool. I definitely like the paint style that I went with for this, trying to be more like what's in game. It's kind of like cell shading and has these nice hard crisp lines to give you the dimensions of the shapes, but yeah. Maybe you'll try and make one of these swords yourselves and impress your friends with your ability to pull something directly from the game and hopefully make it as close to what you see as possible. If not, it's not a big deal. Okay. Maybe you'll get some.
Yay!
And inevitably, they're gonna ask you, how'd you make that? You can give them one of these. Tell them, Much Props. It's a sword. You know the routine. I'll pretend that you're one of those weird horned goblin creatures that needs to be hit. Prepare yourself. If you enjoy what I do here on YouTube and want to continue to see builds like this one, please consider joining these awesome people listed here with me over on my Patreon to build a bigger, better, more creative community together.